Carl, I went to an OGC party right not too long ago. It was really positive. Ton of guys out there. And the group in my kind of the city I live in has been begging me to show up. And as Super Jack Hack says, the Draco owner effect is coming in strong. So I hadn't been to anything, and it was awesome. Ton of guys there, but I got some feedback that was initially positive. It said, the guy was saying like, "Wow, I really like your show," but then he said something that I felt really offended by. I think you would be offended by too. And he said, "I think the shows are the best when you have nothing planned." And I got really upset, Carl, because that implied that you and I do anything less than dozens of hours of prep work for these
Oh
live
yeah.
shows. So
We always discuss the topic that we're going to be talking about in advance.
we never hastily consider, hey, what are you doing next Thursday? Nothing in between. Here's a link 3 minutes before we go live.
Exactly. I know.
Would never do such a thing.
This morning I was thinking about texting you, what are you thinking about? But then I was like, fuck it.
Which is the unofficial tagline of this show. Uh, so what have you been working
Excellent.
on, Carl?
What have I been working on? I am working on a screenplay with some people that we know, which I'm actually very excited about. But I've also been doing some other nonfiction writing and am enjoying that. Trying to, because I've been putting out a lot of pieces on the Spanish Civil War for some time on my Substack, and branching out and talking about other things and applying some rigor to it rather than it just being like posting, right? Is a really nice mental exercise. I've also been playing with AI,
Hmm.
and it is, the way I'd put it is, I don't think the AI apocalypse is here, but I think the white collar apocalypse is here, whether or not it's deservedly so. Because AI is good enough that you can automate enough things that like the C suite is like, all right, let's cut 30% of our staff and the remainder get real nimble and, synergize those efficiencies and good
Well,
luck.
Carl, won't the quality of the product decline?
Who cares about that?
Yeah.
It's like, seriously, in the business world, my whole career has been automating my way out of a job first, and then taking that technical knowledge and applying it at a slightly higher level, while still treating the people that do that kind of work like with respect and actually understanding what they need. But also watching people stop caring about anything other than like the ratings, and it being up to the guy on the front line to just figure it out. Like, are your clients unhappy? Figure it out. Are you not equipped with the tools to and the products that are hitting in the way that we promise? Figure it out. Spin it. And there's an element to where that can work for so long. Yes, Brittany Wood, 1896. Excellent year for semi-automatic weapons. Private equity buys your company, and then it becomes about just cutting it to the bone, looking at the EBITDA numbers, and it's the period that we're in now is identical to the post 2006 2008. Like, it really, like, the economy really went off a cliff in 2008, where uh businesses operate like modern American businesses are a bust out slash like money cycling thing, where cheap money, free money basically props things up, and the amount of businesses out there that have these massive valuations that actually are just hemorrhaging money is a major portion of the market. It's wild.
Well, and to that point, it's actually something I talked about with friend of the show, Stormy Waters, and a show that is up behind the paywall. So
Hooray.
give me money, but it'll be out
Give
tomorrow.
Jay money.
But that was something that, prompted that entire show is we were talking on the phone. And look, I have a finance degree, but I don't know anything about money, as should be very apparent to you, Karl. But in all seriousness, right, one of the things that I was talking to him about was, one, have we basically been in a recession since '08?
Yes.
The way that those terms are calculated is constantly changed. The one I remember, likely many others will, I was in college when Joe Biden and his cronies just redefined what a recession was,
Yes.
so that they could say, hey, we're not in a recession. And you can look at that and say, oh, Joe Biden's a dastardly Irishman, which is true.
It's true.
Or you can look at it and say, wait a minute, if we've done this once, have we ever done it before?
I was about to say that. Like, is it not only Joe Biden mans, but many Republican, many Republican. There's this whole switcheroo that the parties do on a regular basis, where one party basically wears out its welcome, and then the other party comes in, and then they do the same stuff, but they spin it in just the right way.
Can you think of one relevant example from recent weeks?
Golly, it's funny because I'm working on this piece that I mentioned to you before, where like a gun control timeline, where things transitioned from being like managed on the municipal and state level, and a lot of it basically being like European lore, which is like, as long, scumbags who are carrying weapons get cop weapons charges, and you can crack them in the head, and just like throw them in a dungeon or execute them. And then also like people who aren't white can't have guns unless like the state says it's okay. Like that's literally European law for thousands of years, and that's pretty much like much of the world at a certain level of development. And then you have these federal innovations where frankly, major traction for federal gun control came under Republican leadership, specifically Reagan and Bush Sr. So anyway, my point being, it's the old switcheroo, and if you examine the redefining of terms and the recalculation of terms, like cost of living index is another good one, where they're like, oh, cost of living doesn't involve food, but it does involve big screen TVs.
It doesn't involve energy, housing, medical.
Correct.
Just those like ancillary details of your life.
Minor things. It's so like if Mr. Burden was enthroned as our emperor, cost of living index would be like secondhand weapons and weapon accessories would be like one of the top level things.
Slightly intoxicated gun broker purchases would be the major indication of inflation. Yeah, in all seriousness, but to that point about, obviously going back to your point about, companies and private equity, one of the other questions that's sort of a knock on from that is how much of this, growth in indexes like the S&P 500, the market writ large, is basically just currency debasement, basically just inflation. Because again, with cost of living, inflation is hidden. If you look at the shadow stats, right, the rate for the last couple of years comes up to 12 to 15%. And you think about it, wait a minute, that's above the market rate. So if you actually think about it, it's like, well, yeah, sure, your money is in the market and it might be doing well. But if you compare that to actual functional inflation,
the
math changes. And similarly, as regards to companies, right? Well, your compensation, as you and I have gone into before, is heavily dependent on stock price.
Yeah.
And so if you're already riding the wave of just basic inflation and then can throw in some kind of short-term cost cutting, where your stock price can on paper explode, while not actually doing anything to benefit the company itself. One of the big stories of in the last several weeks, and it's been a while since we've, talked to Karl, is, the massive tech offshoring, right? Companies like Amazon and
Yeah.
Google laying off over 10,000 workers apiece and employing tens of thousands in mostly India, let's be honest. Now,
Yes.
is there a, shall we say, ethno-sectarian component to that? I will leave my viewers to decide. But also,
And they'll all say
right?
yes.
Yeah, yes. But also, right, we understand that that is a cost saving measure. You don't have to pay benefits to these people. You don't have to pay them, as the socialists would say, a livable wage in America. You can, hire these people at 3 to 1. And does it make the product worse? Sure. Well, does it make the product worse in a fast enough time span for the people sitting at the top to care about it?
Exactly.
No, clearly not.
And on top of that, I have this theory of how this AI bubble is going to play out, and I must admit that it's based on my experience in the business world servicing Fortune 100 companies, servicing them in however you want to interpret that term. It feels like sometimes this is a highly planed tactical stream. We're going to be using hand planers, wooden blocks with pieces of sharpened iron in it to plane things by the time this bubble bursts. So anyhow, the way that things in the past have worked, and I've seen continuously, is that any sort of efficiencies introduced by software, which are extensive, let's be honest. Let me give an illustration. When my father was 24 years old, working as an accountant at a big firm, they put you through like an 18-month to 2-year like grind, and those who survive can work for them. He had a secretary doing entry-level work because he needed to focus on the work. She would handle correspondence and all the like little logistical things. And then by the time he retired, owning a pretty good-sized business, don't dox me or anything, he shared a secretary with 4 other executives under him in his company. He had a co-owner and then 2 other guys who were pretty important. They all shared one secretary because software made things so efficient that they literally didn't need an extra mouth sitting there, basically, someone to pay a big salary to and benefits to, because there just wasn't enough work. So it's really interesting because and again, like I said, I've automated my way out of work, and a lot of the grunt work that I used to do very manually is something that, like, tools that the company subscribes to with X number of accounts having access to it on an annual basis is pretty efficient and gets around a lot of this automated work that you have to do. Well, the ability to set up little AI agents, and I'll put a little asterisk here and we'll come back to it, is good enough for a lot of kinds of things that there's this mania. There's been a mania for 8 to 10 years in business that AI is coming and AI is going to automate XYZ. Well, it only automates like rote work, but it can streamline and simplify your access to what's really important. And so you hit this equation where people need decompression time while doing work, while doing intense work, and then going to meetings, which hopefully are actually doing things, unlike most executives now, where it seems like their job is putting people in meetings and wasting their time so they can't get work done. But anyway, there's a lot of things that you can make more efficient, but then the burnout comes, because if anyone has worked in a high churn, high volume kind of job of any kind that's very manual and stuff, people burn out brutally. And like in there were industries I worked in where the average person lasted 12 to 18 months. And if I stuck it out long enough that and I was completely fried, but it was good for me to learn that discipline. Yes, the burnout do be like that. It was good to learn that, because it gives you a lot of perspective, and it gives you the appropriate like emotional detachment to where you can separate, like, this is just the job and this is something I should be upset about, right? So by making people more efficient in these white collar jobs, we're already at a situation where the average person is like bringing work home with them. They have the stupid device attached to them at all times. Bosses, I had a situation where I had someone complaining that I wasn't responding to emails at 10 a.m. on Sunday that were being sent by a client at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, because I was in church with my family, and the homosexual was like, you really should be paying closer attention to taking care of our client and making them feel serviced. And yes, so people are like, that world is going to become so incredibly disgruntled, but at the same time, again, because of outsourcing, because of automation, because of, frankly, things that get rid of like good workers, people are just happy to have a job. And a lot of the like fake jobs that we saw introduced in 2020 and 2021 for, special classifications of people, a lot of that stuff is frankly going away, out of necessity, but there's still room for it in certain kinds of organizational structures. A lot of the nonsense is going away, but their businesses are like really embracing this really silly culty vibe to try to keep people there and engaged. So
to that point, Karl, the sort of infamous quote that I stole from one of my friends, and he says, this is basically repeated like a mantra, is, well, we're not doing well, we're doing good.
Yes,
completely shifting
yes,
the sort of goalposts. And one of the interesting things that he brings up is that, especially in kind of non-core areas, right? Areas of the country that aren't, New York, LA, what have it, that the corporate world is kind of behind the times, especially at
yes,
these small to mid-sized companies. So they are still going through kind of woke classic 2 or 3 years past the
yes.
sell-by date.
And religious institutions do this as well, and conservative coded institutions are in the same cycle. Sorry, please go on.
Oh, 100%. And you see this with, and I'm not a Southern Baptist, but you see this with the guys, talking about what's going on at the SBC or any of these other kind of evangelical organizations, that they are going through what the corporate world did 5-10 years ago. It's on a delay, right? Even with, the internet expediting that process. But to your point about AI, I still have some contacts in the healthcare world. I, spent some time there. And, one of the things that has become really endemic there is, the replacement of a lot of, patient facing roles.
Yes.
So for instance, what we would kind of derogatory refer to as like the window witches, right? The people who sit behind the glass and tell you where to go. But right now, that is in a, auxiliary role, right? There's an iPad and you use the little AI chatbot to sign in. But we all know where that's going, right? And look, I'm not going to pretend that, ladies who work at hospital front desks are the cornerstone of the economy, but that is a job, right? And you see where that's going. It's like, okay, well, I can track this. And again, what does your 85-year-old grandmother do with an iPad? That's indeterminate.
Exactly.
Right? That's not the real purpose, from kind of the top down on that. And one of the interesting things, Carl, that I'm kind of curious to watch, and this came up in my conversation with Peter Brimelow, but also my article at Chronicles, which you can read. I'll drop a
Excellent
link.
plugs, by the way, sir.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, let's
Professional
drop that in.
podcaster.
Yeah, and most of the time when I say that, it's because I'm an idiot who doesn't know how to unmute my mic. But was one of the things that I've been sort of wondering about is the fact that immigration, migrant workers, and offshoring has up until relatively recently primarily been a problem for dirty, stinky people we don't like. Speaking, of course, as the kind of coastal elite liberal.
And software
Been a
engineers
problem.
who are dirty, stinky people we don't like,
They
according to the
actually are dirty
C-suite.
and stinky.
Yeah, the C-suite hates software developers. They really, it's really insane. Anyway, sorry.
Javier Olivia, I think that this is a good point. It used to be you would work, get a divorce, and then a heart attack and crash out by 50. They're taking our American birthright to expend yourself in pursuit of a ultimately meaningless career, and that will not stand. Where was I before? Oh yeah, but one of the things that I've been curious about is as that sort of goes up the economic chain. We're starting to see this hit the kind of laptop class jobs as these sort of H-1B and other visas are applied more and more broadly. I'm curious if that demographic will move in their own economic interest, or if the kind of ideological connection to progressive platitudes on immigration are sort of buried too deep. Do you have a thought on that, Carl?
It it's it's kind of hard to know exactly how to respond to that, because we're going to see a very interesting juggling act of all these things, because frankly the conditions that we're under they require a pivot in all of their framing of these things that they're doing to us. And frankly, a lot of business leaders have been struggling with this themselves. Like, if you look at the Silicon Valley guys who threw in behind Trump when they realized the shift in the coalitions, they were like, we need to really do something because we're finally getting screwed too. It is the irreconcilable contradictions in the way this stuff has been percolating are hitting us now and keeping us from doing our thing. And one of the problems that we have out here in prole land is that there are a lot of memes in the kind of like I'll say quote unquote dissident space, but it's really the highly intelligent yet basically shoved aside competent white guy world, and there's some like incompetent people in this that this applies to as well, but generally like there is an underlying rage, as Brittany Wood points out again, that is percolating out there, and a lot of it was really fundamentally incorrect in a lot of ways about presuppositions, or they were directionally correct, but a lot of the details are wrong as far as like who's the one keeping you down, and people consuming like the easily available propaganda spin associated with that, like it was like the Rockefellers and all those guys. There's this muddled perspective on reality that in a lot of ways there's good points to it, but it becomes confused because of just people being angry, frankly. And so as we sort through all of these things and get directional and realize that part of the problem is our individualistic attitudes and our non-nationalist attitudes, although there's fair debates to be had about how natural America is, given its empiric form rather than really national form, maybe, although we don't know how that's really going to play out. It makes it a really interesting thing because everyone has to shift their talking points based on the conditions on the ground right now and the changes. And you really do have to appeal to people who could theoretically like do the thing to you. And that's becoming like a plurality of America at this point in time, because everyone has been told like, screw you, you don't matter. Well, little, Italian guys in green hats appearing in the dark in New York City, and then disappearing again, can become folk heroes in more ways than one, because there's much ruin in a nation.
So, Karl, slight change of subject. When I went to grab the link to that Chronicles piece, there's a comment section, mostly very positive. One negative piece, rather negative on my opinion on the GOP's futile efforts to reaching out towards immigrants, minorities, and full name. So I just decided, what? Let me Google the name. Who could have guessed? I'll leave it at that. Who could have guessed?
Many such cases. Did you look at a picture of them or the early life?
No, I just went to ancestry.com.
Okay.
What do you?
I mean, no, I can tell just by looking at that name.
Well, you know what, Karl? I try to be a good liberal.
You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You said, yeah. I want to be sure. Yeah, a true camper doesn't even have to consult that information.
True. I see Tyson Hockley in chat. We do have an episode scheduled. I'm excited to get him.
Oh, nice.
On. Yeah. This has been I don't ever intend to have themes, right? When I do like weeks of programming, but like the last 2 weeks have just turned into the UK and Canada, just back to back to back, with more on the way. Anyway, point being, yeah, I think that's that matches up with what I have sort of anecdotally seen, and you every couple weeks there's sort of this continual dialogue of shall we say a Hindu nationalist type, blaming Pakistan, disinformation, retired YouTube star PewDiePie for normalizing a negative opinion of his nation. And I think what's interesting is that almost invariably there's the the quote tweet dunk that's like, no, it's not that. You guys just started showing up.
Yeah.
And honestly, like to me, the first I really heard, like remember, anything really about India at all, other than just a like, nations of the world kind of thing, was the Bobs and Vagine saga. Right, which was very, very early, back in the days where Facebook was still relevant.
Yeah.
And it was, just the most insane, illiterate sexual aggression.
Yes.
Was, let's be honest, very, very funny. Open cloth, show Bobs. Like it was pretty funny. But, the idea that this is just simply some sort of like, psyop campaign, right, I think is completely and totally inaccurate. And to that point, even in, shall we say, kind of like genteel progressive settings, you see those ideas due to cultural differences, I'll put it that way. And I'm curious to see how that develops, especially as the kind of consequences of, the kind of open marketplace of labor continue to be felt kind of up and down the socioeconomic ladder. Point for another stream, perhaps. But Karl, you have written a pretty interesting article, which admittedly you sent at roughly 3 a.m. my time. So haven't had a chance to go through it because I am an old man and go to bed promptly at 9:55. But point is, right, it's a pretty interesting idea. And obviously, you're putting it out for publication. I'm not asking you to go through it. But in my state, apparently New Mexico, a few others, right? Gun control is on the table again.
Yeah.
And you and I were even talking about it before we got going. This is the last episode we had with Ardwolf.
It was inspired by our conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm curious if you could, not trying to get you to spoil the article, but can you describe like your thought process and, what you took away from that last conversation?
Yeah. So to summarize, I as much as I talk about subjects that are very negative, and you have to understand that these things are negative, I try to be the white pill guy. Like we're in a mutual group chat where I'm almost inevitably the like, but think about it this way, they're screwing themselves and that's what's good. I always try to spin it that way. It doesn't mean like that dark times aren't ahead. I'm just very confident. And frankly, a huge amount of that is I feel like this is going to sound insane, but my religious faith allows me to put things into perspective on a very long timeline, and I become very fatalistic about things. And maybe I've read Dune too many times, but like when you see a trend that is inevitable, it doesn't make sense to fixate on it and be like, oh, woe is me. There's this line from the Hagakure, which is Japanese, and yes, I have weebish tendencies, but there's great wisdom in it, and it fits into the Christian ethos as well, which is you're walking through a town and there's a rainstorm. The man who like ducks in and out of under the eaves of houses to like try not to get wet as much or to avoid getting wet still gets just as soaked as the man who walks right down the middle of the road, on a long enough timeline, right? So like if you're standing under the eaves of a house and it's raining, you're fine. But if you're walking along the road, you're going to get soaking wet no matter what. But you will become perplexed if you're trying not to get wet. It's you if you resolve yourself and you accept that you're going to get wet, you're fine. And Karl Dahl is all about getting wet. Anyway. So my point is gun control is this, and the legal the legal regulatory world of things. Yes, they're real. Yes, they're a consideration. But what really matters is what these things are for. And this isn't a hobby where dumping, mag dumping at 900 RPM into a hillside, while fun, is like the purpose of these devices, right? The Second Amendment isn't a hobby or a lifestyle, which is something that you see all the time online. And it's insane to think that you need, and don't misinterpret my words, but if you have a functioning AR-15, 30 round magazines, a bunch of 20s because they're handy, and parts and loadout, like, you're pretty good to go. And so you should just train with that weapon. And so it's not the end of the world to be grandfathered in when a state restriction is put in place. Also, state level restrictions really on a long enough timeline are not that big of a deal. Like the people, and I'm not saying you shouldn't fight it. Of course you should fight it in more ways than one, but lawfully, legally. But like, given the trend line as to where we are in America 2026 and what the future holds for us, like, this is not the time to panic and move to Arizona so that you can stay inside a house that you only leave because you have air conditioning. And then 3 months out of the year, you pat yourself on the back for your low tax rate and mag dump, full auto into a dirt berm in the desert. Like, it's insane that this defeatist mentality of running away and accepting your fate, as you're defeated, but you pat yourself on the back for your freedoms in a state that is like rapidly becoming Mexican. That running away, you will not survive, and your children and grandchildren will not survive with a running away mentality. You have to confront this stuff, and the time for that is coming. And on the federal level, the deregulations are coming hot and heavy, and a lot of it is basically inevitable from nullification. Yes, lots of widows selling milsurp in Arizona. That's true. Buy them. I'm not saying that like you shouldn't take advantage of the fact that boomers with massive gun collections dying isn't something that you can avail yourself of. The boomer amassing of these great things and the skyrocketing of these prices is being countered by boomer attrition, general lack of money out there anyway, and gluts of these weapons. Like World War II stuff, for example, is coming down in price in reality when people actually want to sell stuff. Like if you're buying it from like a specialty website, their prices skyrocket, but you can get stuff out there. And then as the boomers die off, as the people with massive disposable incomes die off, they're not being replaced by people with massive disposable incomes in nearly the numbers that you're used to. 10 years from now, you're going to be able to get an M1 Carbon or a Garand, right? Yes, you can buy thermal imaging and night vision in Virginia. You can buy level floor plates, get multi-curve, single curve, like works on paper, but it gets very uncomfortable. Trust me, you're going to want multi-curve. You can get all the stuff that you need, and you have enough to defend yourself individually and collectively. And the important thing here is that the only way we win and advance against these incursions against us by our enemies is by asserting our historic rights, which is not because there's a piece of paper. It's because we say so, and we back it up. And 10 years from now, like some libtard says, and has a piece of paper that like a Bangladeshi can take away your European rights to arms as an individual, like people will be laughing about that with their feet up on like structures made of human skulls. Like it's completely insane that people think that 2026 is 1982. We saw, if you go back to 1961, there was almost no on paper legal carry permits issued with outside of like friends of the cops and the elites around the whole country. However, regular people were carrying guns all the time and it wasn't a problem. The police would generally be like, we're going to enforce it against like the problems. And you would have some sort of positive defense like, oh, well, you're a business owner and you were carrying a lot of money and you were on your way to your business, whatever. They would make allowances for people. But then because everyone has equal rights, they had to start enforcing the law. And immediately, shall issue carry became a thing. Washington State was the first state in America in 1961 to adopt shall issue carry laws. So they required that if you were not a felon and you weren't a problem, they had to issue you a carry permit when you requested one and paid for one, and there was no test or anything like that. And now we have and Texas, the wonderful state of Texas that everyone thinks is so based, didn't have concealed carry laws until 1995. Like it was in the 80s and 90s when things really shifted to where the South had shall issue carry laws. And now all these places have constitutional carry, right? Which is, if you're not Don Quavius, you can go strapped, concealed carried or open carry. You should probably concealed carry, but you should also not care if people know you're armed. There's a difference between that and open carry. So these trends shift all the time. The NFA, like huge portions of the NFA, are basically going to be gone forever on the federal level because, one, people introduce devices which basically used federal equal protection laws to make short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns, like those laws, almost basically unenforceable. And so legislators said, this is nonsense. ATF basically agreed, and now you have short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns with no tax on a tax law, which means it's going to get thrown out probably within a year. And so you're welcome. Suppressors also. Suppressors make a lot of sense. They're a safety device, etc. This is a back-end legalization of and deregulation of suppressors. So on the federal level, the feds are being swamped by technologies. Here's another one. Forced reset triggers and super safeties. They technically, because of the way they're constructed and their mechanisms, function in compliance with or in such a fashion that they pass muster at the federal level as being semi-automatic and not a machine gun, right? But they have highly semi-automatic function. They're fully semi-automatic, right? And so that is essentially protected thoroughly at the federal level, which means there's another challenge to the NFA right there, just sitting there pulsating in front of us. Like, what's the real difference? So these things are happening on the federal level because the scaffolding of legal restrictions that were imposed upon us during the 20th century don't really pass muster logically, coherently, constitutionally, and historically. So those are going away. So you have state laws, and the libtards are like, well, we can do anything because we're just going to shove it down your throat because we gerrymander and do XYZ till we own you forever. Is that going to continue? I'm pretty skeptical. Is it gonna? It can continue for a while, but is it going to continue past the point of like the thing that's looming ahead of us? Probably not. So don't despair. Stack the stuff that you need first and take care of it in a logically coherent way. My article is about that, but it's also not the end of the world if you're stuck with like semi-automatic shotguns that don't have pistol grips. Those are incredible weapons for blowing holes in people. They're basically the best ever. Law enforcement has been using semi-automatic shotguns cut down with extended magazine tubes since 1900. There's a lot of things that you should really not worry that much about in terms of the general trends, but most importantly, assert yourself. And yes, proliferation is the real Second Amendment. Like this runaway, I'm going to go retire and live in Texas because Texas is so wonderful. Give me a break. Like that, this mentality is all wrong. We need to start to think about nullification, clustering in our zones, reinforcing each other, establishing parallel institutions, and resisting these things as collectives. And this gets us going. This just helps get us started. And frankly, these economic indicators get us started in that, because what makes you dependent on the system is being dependent on those good boy points from these jobs that are going away. AI empowers you as an individual to have capabilities finally, like barely right now, like I'm starting to believe, I'm like, wow, this is actually really useful to me as an individual. I'm using AI for stuff that it couldn't do a month ago, that is streamlining my productivity in certain projects that I have. And it's great. And so by using these things like smart, intelligent people, we have to separate ourselves from our dependence on this system and reassert ourselves by establishing our own systems lawfully, legally. Thank you.
Yeah, so several things there. One, even if you are heavily behind enemy lines with nothing to your name, right? To be honest, you can do way worse than a CMP M1 Garand.
Yes.
Right? Okay, it's a little long, but they're quite shootable. And to be perfectly honest, like you can do a lot with that.
Yes.
But I'm highlighting this comment from Josh Pulver. And I'm not jumping on this guy. I think that this is a common
Yes.
a common objection, right? The problem is we can only have small arms. What is allowed to civilians is basically World War I small arms tech with some extra lights and lasers. We don't stand a chance against air or sea capabilities. I mean, yes, 100%, right? But this whole like resisting tyranny frame, this whole kind of 1776 frame, in my mind, is completely and totally the wrong way to look at it. Friend of the show, Andrew Edwards, wrote a really interesting novel, King of Dogs. And he's obviously a very capable tracker, survivalist type himself. That's probably a slur, but he's a capable guy. So the technical aspects of it are quite good, albeit it was sort of written before drones. So there's some stuff missing there. But what he's basically talking about is not some sort of like, great rise up rebellion, but basically sort of a South Africa situation, where things just get way worse. There's still technically a government. There are still, big corporations and PMCs and criminal gangs. But a lot of stuff, there just isn't much rule of law. And so if you look at a place like South Africa, it's like, well, okay, like those guys have on paper about the same gun laws we do.
Yeah.
Are those enforced? No. But is that a useful thing to have for obvious reasons, right? It is a dangerous place to be. Your physical security is your own responsibility, and the physical security of your community is your own responsibility. You saw this 5 years ago. There were a bunch of, I think they called them like the taxi cab riots. I can't remember. I've talked to South Africans enough, but I'm garbage on their history, as they can all tell you. But when these big riots were happening, the colored community, which is not a slur, it's an actual ethnic group there,
yeah,
basically had their roof Korean moment. And okay, sure, there's more of a government there in South Africa than there could be in a place like Somalia or Libya. But those guys didn't get prosecuted. There's not really a way to get it prosecuted.
Correct.
But their businesses didn't get burnt down. And okay, yeah, if the rioters had offshore naval assets, they'd be screwed. But that's not really the situation they're in. And I see Sean Weiland talking about, the mindset that you see among, certain, gun tubers like, Brassfax and Hop, who I've spoken to before, the prepared citizen. And, I may have differences in, belief or framing with those two guys, but I think that is an acceptable, like a good way to look at it, which is like, look, like you're not trying to fight the feds. You shouldn't do that. It's illegal. But also like, yeah, 100%. Like they have predator drones, right? They can send a group of, FBI HR tree to kick down your door and turn you into Chef Boyardee. That's not the point. But the point is, right, if you're looking at the trajectory of this thing, this country, this nation, we've already seen pretty dramatic declines in the rule of law. You and I have been talking about the normalization of political violence for months now.
What's the murder clearance rate?
It is pretty low, and I am not a fan of murder. We only take brave stands.
Murder's
here on the
bad.
Jay Burden Show. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, like if present trends continue, like, it is a wise thing to invest in. Uh, by the way, I just want to do this because I'll forget otherwise. Uh, we have a few super chats from the last couple shows. By the way, if you want to send super chats, know two things. One, I will read them. And two, now that Karl and I are going to be doing these live streams more regularly, half of everything goes to Karl. So if you think I'm an idiot, I don't want to give him money, well, guess
Thank
what?
you.
Half of it's going to Karl.
Thank you.
So just a few, and then we can continue with this conversation and a few comments I want to highlight rather. Paladin YYZ very generously, like almost as soon as I pressed the end stream button, sent in a very large super chat where he said, not the kind of podcast I can just plop into 45 minutes late. We'll have to rewatch. Great guest. I agree. Ardwolf is a great guest, and Paladin is very generous. These last two were on my streams with Arch. Go back and check those out. I think that came out on the 29th. I used to listen to Arch every night to go to sleep. He convinced me that Warhammer 40K was real. Actually, very similar. Warhammer 40K is real.
It is.
And I used to listen to Arch when I worked horrible manual jobs. For instance, I was telling one of my buddies about this, just a horrible disaster. I was doing tile, supposed to be, putting fake styrofoam stones on a fireplace. It was stupid. But anyway, the guy I was working for, he didn't often do this, but he was the contractor for a full floor renovation, right? So the kitchen, so he had cabinet guys doing that, and the wood floors were supposed to be refinished. And the guy he got to do them didn't do his job correctly, didn't prep everything, so he refinished the floors. And when he put the top coat on, it basically like beat it up on top and then froze like a rock. So it looked like tree sap, right? Just like these little like clear bubbles. And so for basically a week and a half, because this guy wouldn't show up to fix his work, I was sanding and mopping the floors with this like horrible gummy half cured resin. And the whole time I was listening to Arch Warhammer, specifically his series on the Siege of Rocks, which is quite good. I highly recommend it if you can still find it. Yes, I can't read your name, but you are correct, generally speaking. One more from that same one. The best answer to all of this is Trump Buddha. Yes. Sort of a mode I try to emulate, right? So anyway, sorry, that was a big digression. But I see a guy talking about last thing he needs is kind of an affordable rifle. Basically, not to get too into this, like Autismo-wise, buy a stripped lower if you're handy with tools. Put it together. Yeah. It'll be like $100. Honestly, go to Peace Geek and get one for $30. I own a bunch of them. The parts are another $80-$90. And then get, a sensible 16-inch free float upper from a company that you've heard of. All in, you're probably $500-$600 for something that's fully capable. Not to get too much into the autism, but if you don't know where to go, that'll work. And when I say decent company, I don't mean like BCA, Anderson, RIP, like DPMS, anything. Like honestly, the mid-tier PSA stuff is perfectly fine, especially if you're, competent enough to check that everything was correctly installed by Don Quavius.
It probably was, given that they're in Lakewood, Washington.
Fair enough. Sorry, I just had to expel this cat. We had a $40 super chat. Very generous from Super Jack Hack 2. I just want to give Karl his $20 and all that implies. Let me tell you, with Karl, that gets you a lot. Karl is the originator and popularizer of the phrase, I'm not gay, but $20 is $20. In the same group chat, you were talking about earlier, it's got I won't get too much into it, but it's got people you would have heard of. Like basically like the Inquisition group chat. And for whatever reason, Karl, and genuinely, I'm so sorry for this. We've all just decided to make fun of Karl constantly because you were by far the nicest person in the group chat. It's just the most slanderous claims about you possibly. And so I'd like to apologize. I won't stop doing it, but I do at least feel bad about it. And then Josh Pulver with the very correct advice, just do an arrow lower and a BCM upper. Yeah, Honestly, it's the Reddit build, but it's great. It's what you should do if you have the money. If you don't, you might need to be a little more creative. But it's not rocket science. Carl, are you still there? Hmm. Carl is not there. So we'll vamp for a little bit. Uh, all right. uh, Sean, I will neither confirm nor deny certain rumors, but some have said that. Yeah, I think what I might do, uh, oh, there goes Carl. For the sort of second half of this, I've got another 45 minutes, is go through my article on Chronicles Magazine. I sent the link to it. If you don't mind, go over there, leave him a comment. It helps me out. Uh, I'm trying to do more writing. But the context of this will be familiar to those who've heard me talk, right? I kind of develop ideas live on air, and then go from there and turn it into an article. And I won't be doing a direct read through, just kind of going through this article. I should take down, that's a horrible message to have stuck over my face while I read something serious. I'm going to use it as an outline, right? So the name of this article is called "In Search of Natural Conservatives" by me, Jay Burton, in Chronicles Magazine. So basically, I start off by going through the sort of platitudes of the conservative movement. Things like, family values, hardworking Americans, the kind of mostly harmless phrases that you can hear in, any RNC speech since, really the 80s. But particularly, I drew attention to one, natural conservatives or natural Republicans. This idea that conservative or culturally conservative immigrant groups will inevitably become GOP voters, right? This is an idea that over the past 40 years has just been repeated ad nauseum. Endless amounts of money, endless amount of time has been spent pursuing this goal. And additionally, anyone who dissents from it is purged. They're just thrown out. And yes, I will be getting to super chats in a little bit. I just want to go through this to kind of keep going for the second half of the stream. Which, by the way, I haven't heard from Karl at all, so I assume he got blackbagged. Anyway, so particularly that phrase was made popular by Ronald Reagan. For instance, in a Spanish language broadcast during one of his, I think it was his second presidential run, he said this phrase, "Latinos are Republicans, they just don't know it yet." George Bush made similar comments justifying the pathway to citizenship, right? The big amnesty back then. And this argument has reemerged in the kind of woke right moral panic that has sprung up really after about October 7th, but let's be honest, also in relation to figures like Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and their conversation. But I took a quote from Rod Dreher, "What I Saw and Heard in Washington," where the conservative commentator quoted an anonymous MAGA Zoomer policy wonk and person of color. So this is that alleged source, and I say alleged for obvious reasons, describing Nick Fuentes' followers. He said, "They're delusional. There are a lot of immigrants and native-born members of ethnic groups who are natural Republicans," that phrase, "and whom Donald Trump won in 2024. Take Indians, for example." Interesting reveal there. But point is, right, we see that phrase, natural Republicans. That idea is present even in modern kind of House conservative commentary, allegedly from a MAGA Zoomer policy wonk person of color, if you believe it. So carrying on, right, just as, Reagan and Bush before him, this guy is claiming that socially conservative immigrant groups are a voter base in waiting. They're just right there for the taking from the GOP, the conservative right. And the reason we need to continue this purge is they're going to scare them off. But look, the central premise is completely and totally false. We understand here that Hispanics, American blacks, other immigrant groups continually vote for communists, right? Even though, if you ask these people, Black Americans, Somalis, for example, their opinions on different like issues, right? Gay marriage, just homosexuality writ large, you'll get a very conservative right wing answer, right? Like, can you imagine talking to like a Nation of Islam guy about LGBTQ stuff? He's probably not a fan. So initially, on first viewing, this seems like a contradiction, right? This seems like something that follows this kind of logic of the natural conservative. But hey, Karl, you back?
Yeah, my internet decided to go bye-bye right when we were talking about me being a potential homosexual.
Well, it's a sign from God. I hate to say it. I guess it's just true. If you're not there to defend yourself, you know.
You're
So
getting
anyway, Karl, I
pounded.
was going through my article in Chronicles, right? Going through kind of the idea of the natural conservative, the
Yes.
natural Republican, and then going into that central premise that many of these groups who vote for communists are on their own quite socially conservative. But there are two issues, right? One, they're clients of the cultural left, and two, they understand that there's a difference between conserving their culture and conserving our culture. Look, like you guys understand the DNC patronage system, right? They're very good at it. I mean, look, sure, Black Americans, and I'm using them as a stand-in because they're the most monolithic voting bloc in the country, and also the GOP has been gunning for that group for longer than either of us have been
Forever.
alive. Yeah. Now, look, like that's been true since FDR for obvious reasons, but look at the Civil Rights Act, which, in addition to giving a ton of welfare, not literally the Civil Rights Act, but in the same kind of time frame, uh, also gave like sweeping rights. For instance, the idea that any situation where minority groups are underrepresented, there's the assumption of racism. The federal government has a whole division, at the DOJ, designed to step in and correct that. I mean, look, like this is the kind of like this is an absurd privilege. Like, why would you ever go for equality, right? Also, we understand that there's huge negative rights, right? Freedom from prosecution, freedom from gun laws. I mean, just look at the ATF under Biden with
Yeah.
the blicky, as they say. Uh, Also, I specifically cited the case of one Gary O. Edwards, a brother who stabbed a homeless who stabbed another white guy in Portland, July of last year. And look, like there's video evidence of that, but the jurors acquitted Edwards because while being stabbed, the other guy dropped a gamer word, right? The idea was the problem is not, there's a stabbing, but it's that while being stabbed, this guy besmirched the honor of a client group. Like this is basically the law that the samurai had, where it's like if a peasant, insulted them, you could just draw your katana and, kind of cut them in half. So clearly, right, there's some privilege here, as they say. But what does the GOP offer? Well, sure, they have, like a certain amount of tolerance, right? You're likely to advance, up through the ladder really quickly. Like the old joke is like, what do you call a black guy at an RNC meeting? Mr. Chairman, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but effectively, they're offering you equality, right? Equality of opportunity. They're basically running with the stated premise of 90s Democrats. But let's be honest, who would rationally take that deal, right? Who would say, I will give up all of these privileges in exchange for equality, right? And I kind of ironically quote, the old progressive saw, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And look, we've seen this in actuality work out, right? This program has been run for like years, decades, and even in my own state, right? We ran a immigrant woman of color, and she won 6 to 7% of the black vote. For instance, you have the root. I didn't cite this, but I should have. Basically saying Winsome Earl Sears isn't black,
Yeah.
which should not be surprising to anyone who's paying attention. But also that other aspect I talked about, right? The gap between being personally conservative for your own culture and conservative, broadly speaking, is it all comes down to what is your nation, right? This is sort of the quote from my good friend Kevin Deanna, where he says, everyone is a blood and soil nationalist for the nation they actually care about, right? Uh, you see this particularly in the kind of anti-ICE riots of early last year, the La Raza stuff, or Ilhan Omar, right? Despite being one of the most left-wing, members of the legislature, when she speaks in her own language, like there's a clip that went pretty viral, a few years ago. She's talking in Somali, saying, I am there as a representative of the Somali people. I am there to make sure that Ethiopia doesn't take any Somali territorial waters. Like, oh, that's a weird thing for someone who, allegedly represents the nation of America and specifically the people of Minnesota. That seems quite far away from, an inter-African dispute over tribal waters. But nonetheless, that's what happens. And perhaps one of the most insidious parts is that Republicans think they can run sort of 70% of this program and get the same results, right? Give that same unwavering loyalty from these minority groups. I mentioned, of course, right, Winsome Earl-Sears, who, despite checking off all of those boxes, won 7% of the black vote, 20% of the Asian, and 33% of the Latino vote, which again, if these are groups supposedly that Trump won, like Indians, who I believe it's 30% voted for Trump. Well, one, why isn't that happening? And two, like, why would you support the importation of more people who vote against you, basically 2-1, right? Carrying on, like clearly,
innumerate.
This is yes, yeah, innumerate, and oftentimes you see these sort of good-hearted conservative types will instantly pivot to civil rights language, right? Talking about Democrats as the real racists, bringing up the Civil War, John C. Calhoun, any other kind of similarly unfashionable past Democrat. But like, guys, come on. We understand that that argument is literally only made by those people, and it is widely mocked by the entire political left and those specific minority groups. That racism, for whatever we want to say of the Democratic Party, is completely and totally irrelevant to these patronage networks. So what's the answer, right? This came up in my conversation with Peter Brimelow. Well, it's the sailor strategy, right? It is the white majority, the heritage Americans, the people who, let's be honest, vote for the GOP. Well, why not? To be honest, I think a lot of baby boomers, particularly conservative baby boomers, are completely and totally traumatized by the idea of being on the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
Like deep down, they actually do believe that they are the villains, that they don't deserve to rule unless they have, I was about to use a potentially problematic phrase there, I'll leave it, but unless they have the seal of approval of minority groups, particularly Black Americans. That is what makes something legitimate. And anything that advantages the group that you represent or disadvantages or seen to disadvantage that group is on its face completely and totally illegitimate. And the conclusion of this article is basically like that premise needs to die, clearly. We've seen a very dramatic example in the state of Virginia about how that is not the pathway to success. And understand, guys, of course, I'm writing to a specific audience. I am not necessarily saying we should put all our hope in the GOP, right, in the MAGA movement or whatever. But fundamentally, like that premise is endemic in good sort of conservative institutions, in good conservative Christian Americans. And unless it goes away, that group of people is doomed to lose forever, right? The idea that you can't advocate for your own interests because it would be, mean, horrible, racist, right? And so effectively, right, that needs to die. That needs to be abandoned. This has been a brief summary, right? It's a longer article. I just sort of hit the highlights. But to me, you see this as well, and this is a hell of a transition, Karl. in the 2A space as well.
No,
Right?
100%.
Where it's this idea that of, and the extreme liberal version is the kind of 2A for all stuff, like we went over in that, you know, kind of chilling article from Wired a while back, talking about, you know, the Trantifa types, you know, training for, you know, war with the feds, quote unquote, right, in heavy scare quotes, but also, you know, the idea that, you know, what really makes something, you know, legitimate, or what makes it, you know, a laudable thing, something that you can argue for, is how it indexes with certain minority groups, certain, you know, client groups of the DNC. So, for instance, anytime there's an increase in, you know, women or, you know, people of color, homosexuals less so, but let's be honest, they'll probably get to it sooner than later. You know, buying guns. You know, that's the idea that that's good. That's what makes this thing fair, because, you know, we have to be on a level playing field with everyone. And I think that it's something you see a lot, particularly in the more like libertarian circles. Because look, like American gun culture did come out of, in its current instantiation rather, the kind of anti-government, you know, militia movement of the 80s and 90s, but then it went through this sort of libertarian phase. It's kind
Yeah.
of exiting that at the moment. But it's this idea that, you know, statism, the state, the government is the enemy, and, you know, we are all just simple, you know, atomized, right-bearing individuals who need to have their choices maximized. And similarly, right? Uh, I don't think that's a particularly good strategy and a good idea. I've been ranting for a while, Karl. Obviously, you've been out with technical difficulties, but I'm curious to get your response. And oh yeah, CyberChad 2077. Kevin Deanna is great. His show, Identity Politics, right on YouTube. Karl, you were on Identity
Yeah.
Politics not too long ago, weren't you?
Yeah. About 2 weeks ago, we talked about the Spanish Civil War. Shocking.
Great episode.
Thank you.
Yeah, Karl. This is also true of you, but Kevin is one of my favorite writers, favorite producers of
Yes.
content. You should check him out. He is criminally undersubscribed on those platforms. You know, to put it mildly, I think I disagree with him on theology. I'll leave it at that. But nonetheless, he is a good guy personally, and also a very, very capable kind of political analyst. Anyway,
Solid thinker, very knowledgeable about the most relevant stuff to
sure.
us.
So sorry, I was supposed to kick it back to you, Karl, for reaction to your thoughts.
No, that's, you know, that's part of that article and my retort is that there's a consumerist mentality to this, and this individualistic, like, if only we can put guns in the hands of Don Quavius, they'll realize that they should be just like us, instead of thinking that this is a weapon. And it's this like hobbyist rights orientation, and without understanding what rights really are. Rights are things that we have because we say so, and if you treat us as if we don't have them, we will do things to you that are quite precedented. And that's really what they are. You know, if you believe that in PatCon, which is a really important thing to understand, in the late 80s, early 90s, you know, the federal libtard government under both Democrats and Republicans started to treat whitey as the enemy. Any assertive white person essentially talking in certain ways, and not and was surprisingly labeled as a racist, even if, and this quite often took these people by surprise, because they considered themselves as not being racist, because they didn't know yet that they are a racist oppressor. They had not internalized that, despite crippling television addictions. And so they would be quite surprised by these retorts. And then when you examine the groups that originate these labels, like SPLC, for example, closely connected to the ADL, like people who explored these things and actually said, I will believe these people when they say these things, I will believe that they actually believe them. You begin to understand them, and if you take their word for it, there's many words that can be applied to you, many adjectives. And so anyhow, it's this moribund, like, constrained, like, let's bring them up to our level by including them in our activities, and then they'll become patriotic Americans. It's identical to this natural conservatives thing. So the 70 IQ Guatemalan who is 4'8", who just climbed off of his 11-year-old niece, if you hand him a firearm, he will be like, wow, I love George Washington too. It's completely insane.
I'm your top guy, Thomas Jefferson.
It's completely insane. And the way to argue with these things is to put things in terms that are this crude. Like Don Quavius, 13 years old, his local gang hands him a Glock 19 with a switch and a 33 round transparent
it's a
ETS
22.
magazine. Yes, a Glock 22 with a transparent Stendo ETS magazine. Holds it sideways, sprays his school. It isn't classified as a school shooting because only white people do that. And because he wants to get his op. And you think that that these people go into abstraction land and say, well, we should wait until the very moment that the bullet hits someone's central nervous system before we can respond, because they have rights just like us. And it's really quite incredible when you look at how convoluted and stupid these people are, because they've disregarded first principles for 130 years. Like, they are libtards, and they have a crippling media conflation, addiction, and premises that make it impossible for them to think clearly about these things. But fortunately, that population is shrinking, and you compare guys who used to, and there was also a thing where people thought they had to talk this way so they wouldn't get suppressed, again because of like Pat Con. Another guy, I love Matt Bracken. He's a writer, and he was very, 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 very libertarian coded for a very long time, and then now he sounds just like us, and like he was directionally right, but I think he was like handling things in this way tactically for a really long time. But then there were some of these priors that he just wouldn't let go of. Well, those are long gone, and he's basically like practically fed posting on X about the usual suspects who should be fed posted about in this fashion, and I'm tired of pretending that they shouldn't be.
So we have some more super chats. SW42MG. Logistics and ammo should far exceed the cost of a rifle, including water sources, camp food, training allotments, etc. PSA freedom only okay for like 5K rounds. Yeah, true. I mean, of course, my recommendation was based off of if you have literally no money, right? If you have the money to buy something better, do it. But 5K rounds is more than enough for someone who has only enough money to spend $500, right? It's not the be all end all. And the first point, I completely agree. Aramaic Discord, my brother in Draco, assalamu alaikum. I miss my AR-10. Yes, it was hideously expensive. I don't care. I miss it. Yeah, I certainly have things in that category. Actually, I have which we'll probably get to sooner or later. I think I showed you, Karl, the cool LMT AR-10 lower I got. Is my mic really that low? Karl, can you hear me?
I hear you fine. You sound okay to me. I don't know if there's a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it should be good. Yeah. I'll jack it a little bit, but then I might kind of get a little deep fried. I guess I'll just talk louder and we'll say that's good enough.
It could have been, he says that took care of it.
Yeah. You cannot.
Handsome Horse is getting up there in age. He could become hard of hearing. That could be it. But now he hears it fine. So, I love you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted there. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Got completely. Chief Slinging Beef, who continually has the funniest username. By the way, this continually happens to me, like especially when I'm on an Orange show or something, where especially when you're not reading them, very profane, inappropriate names and or super chats are really, really funny.
Oh,
So keep going. Chief Sling Beef isn't that bad. New Starship Trooners book. And then unrelated point, 32 ACP is homo. Karl will be coming to get you. Just to let you know on that. Well, Karl, we are probably about at time. It's been a ton of fun. Thanks for coming on to this highly planed, excuse me, stream.
yes.
Where can people find you? Where can they buy book?
People can buy book at Amazon, Faction and Faction with the Crusaders by